commitment to integrity and acceptance of responsibility in this province.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Chris Varcoe with the Calgary Herald's Don Braid. Don, today we had the cabinet version of musical chairs with the new Premier Jim Prentice. We saw some winners, we saw some losers, and we saw some people pretty much stay the same. But what overall was the message you think that people are going to take out of this shuffle?
Prentice runs it. Some people have been promoted into positions where they don't really seem to offer that much, like Frank Oberle coming into energy. And you get the idea with some of these jobs that Prentice, who already has three, he's taken three unto himself. That's how you shrink a cabinet, do everything yourself. And that he will be running some of these senior portfolios, perhaps including finance, where Robin Campbell, who doesn't have that much experience with that sort of thing. So the main message I take is that Jim Prentice isn't just the Premier, he's the Premier plus.
Well, after the turmoil of the Redford years, maybe that's what the Conservatives needed, maybe that's what they wanted. Let's get right into our winners and losers, though, because obviously with a cabinet only 20 members, that's down from about 30 in Redford's last big shakeup in December of last year. Let's talk about your three winners. Who is on your list?
I would have to say, first of all, Stephen Mandel. Stephen Mandel is not elected. He's the health minister, which is the biggest spending portfolio of all. And he also, less noted, but probably most important, is that Prentice is creating this new operations committee, and Stephen Mandel is actually the chairman of that operations committee. I would have to say Robin Campbell for sure is moving up. You go ahead with yours. I've got a couple more, but go ahead. Where are your winners?
Well, I think Gordon Dirks, if we're going to talk about unelected ministers, let's talk about Gordon Dirks. So
right.
He's more familiar to people in Calgary than obviously in Edmonton. He used to be the chairman of the Calgary Board of Education, had a history as an MLA and a short-lived social services minister in the Grant Devine government in the 1980s. I can't believe I'm old enough to say I covered that, but I remember those days. So he came off as a bit of a wild card. I don't think anybody saw that, but obviously he's in education. And we've got a Premier here who not only wants to build the 40 or 50 new schools that Premier Redford spoke about, but build another 40. So that he's a winner, I thought, right off the top.
Well, if I could just add about Gordon Dirks, I mean, I had some experience with him back in the day when he was in the school board, and he came out of the private school movement, and he was known to be a really strong advocate of private schools, and also to be he came out of the sort of Christian education side.
Right.
And there's already stuff going around on Twitter about is he really one of these guys who's going to be against public education? Well, when he got to the school board, there's no question that he was for public education, but it's controversial right off the top for that reason.
Okay, so I'm going to put another winner out there, and that's Frank Oberle, which you mentioned earlier. We've got him catapulting from Aboriginal Affairs, and remember, it wasn't that long ago that he'd been demoted by Premier Redford to an associate minister, and now you've got the MLA from Peace River becoming the energy minister. That seems like a mighty big jump. Yeah,
for sure. And then here's another one. Heather Klimchuk goes from culture to human services. Now, human services, once Hancock rolled it all into a big ball, that's a big job. That's the PD, Persons with Disabilities job. That's the fatal care, the children in care job. Heather Klimchuk was universally popular with her own people in culture and with the cultural community. She's a very, very nice, likable person. This is a big jump from a fairly minor portfolio into a big spending and big political pothole portfolio.
Might go from one of the smallest cabinet positions all the way up to one of the most biggest and trickiest, as you point out. The other winner I've got on that list is Kyle Fawcett. So it wasn't that long ago that he was an associate minister. He kind of got bumped up with the Tories getting ready for the leadership race. But now he's the environment minister. And I have to wonder how much of the environment minister portfolio is going to remain in Jim Prentice's hands. I mean, he's a former federal environment minister. He's in charge of what looks to be all of the pipeline files. I'm not sure how much control Prentice is going to have in environment, but any way you cut it, Kyle Fawcett's a winner.
I think that's true. And then some of the other ones, like Jeff Johnson stays. There was, he got kind of knocked around in education. He went a little too far. He stays in seniors. I have to call him a winner. There's some talk about whether he would. Jonathan Dennis, solid, steady, stays in justice and ends up swearing in the entire cabinet, except for Prentice today, or at least signing the documents. So I guess that's the winners. Moving on, the losers are really easy.
Yeah, the losers
There's
are easy.
11 of them. There's 11 people who were in cabinet before who are not in cabinet now. And I'd have to say Fred Horn, who's suddenly gone from being the czar of health, who's kind of concentrated every decision-making function in health under himself, unfortunately now has a premier who believes in a health board, so he's out, and his name just was hardly even mentioned today all of a sudden. And then, of course, there's Horner, who was so big and was so important in the Prentice's campaign, and he's out, but he gets the throw of being the advisor on internal trade. And probably most sadly of all, Doug Griffiths, who had that terrible accident on the water over in BC in the summer and really broke his leg. It's not a trivial thing at all. It's not just a broken leg. It's somewhat worse than that. And he's out of, after having been bumped down from municipal affairs to Service Alberta, he's now out of that.
My three losers are going to be Greg Weddick, who was in a cabinet position from down in Lethbridge. Yeah. Now Lethbridge has, and not only Lethbridge, but there's nobody from south of Red Deer outside of the city of Calgary in cabinet. I thought that was strategic and interesting. Cal Dallas, who's from Red Deer, another cabinet minister from the south, also bounced. Thomas Lukazik. I don't think there's a big surprise that Thomas wasn't included, but you've got Rick McIver, who ran against Prentice in, Thomas Lukazik, who's out. So I include him as my loser.
Yeah. Well, the South, it really is interesting. There's already people in the caucus and cabinet who are talking about how odd it is to kick people out of both Red Deer and Lethbridge, because they really are, except for there's only one other possibility for a quasi-rural minister in the South, and that's Ron Casey from Banff. They now have no cabinet representation all the way down from Drayton Valley, which is McQueen's riding up just south of Edmonton, right? So that is really odd. And he's going to have to do something about that. It's like they've given up the whole Southland, except for Calgary, of course, to Wild Rose.
Let's talk about a conclusion here and what we make of it. 14 of 20 ministers in the Jim Prentice government and in the Jim Prentice cabinet were in the cabinet under Redford just a few months ago. Right. So we talk about, Alberta being under new management, as the Premier Prentice said today, but I'm wondering how new of a face you really think this is.
Well, no doubt about the new manager, but same troops. I mean, you can only, when you're working with a bunch of people in a caucus, the retread shop can only handle so many people going through, right? And there really are like 14 of the 20 are actually former ministers or current ministers. So yeah, but I guess the more important thing is going to be how good are they, how they look on the front bench, and how good a job Prentice does.
We'll see you in the days to come.
We will.